All right, well, we'd like to welcome to the show Farhan Quasem. Farhan has 10 years of experience managing sophisticated digital projects, implementing robust learning solutions, building high impact teams, and fostering sustainable relationships with global clients in multiple industries education, finance, and healthcare. He is also the founder of Commudemy. Oh my God, I can't say that correctly, which supports job seekers to find a remote position to start living their best life. Welcome to the show, Farhan.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I'm very happy to have you on here. I'm very excited to discuss this community. Oh my God, is that the correct way to say it again?
You got it. Yeah, it's called Commudemy.
All right. Well, let's just start by that. Tell me the story of Commudemy.
Sure. So at the height of the pandemic in October of 2020, I was working for a company where I thought I would be there for years and years. And actually, that's something that my manager at the time had told me at my most recent, interview type of, performance review type of situation where I was meeting with him one-on-one. And lo and behold, they let me go with maybe 48 hours notice.
Shit. Damn.
So it was one of those, kick in the gut kind of, sentiments where I had to really understand what it was that was happening and pick up the pieces. In hindsight, it was probably the best thing that's happened to me in my career because it enabled me to really understand my value and appreciate, how I could work for myself and how I could work for organizations that actually valued who I was. And the idea behind Commudemy actually emerged right after I was let go because I thought to myself, now that we're in the remote work world, right, where everything is remote and everybody's working, out of their basement or their, spare bedroom, how do we make people who are interested in either transitioning to the remote workplace or those that are already remote, how do we supercharge their abilities to become even more productive, right? And of course, this is October of 2020, so a lot has been written by this point about how to unleash that best version of yourself as you work remotely. And I thought I could throw my hat into the ring and provide value to folks that were in a similar position. I've been working remotely and I've been recognized for leading remote teams for quite some time. So I thought this might be a good way to marry those skills that I have with something that I could actually, provide value to for others.
So how does Commudemy? Oh God, how does Commudemy accomplish that? How does Commudemy help you find a remote work position?
So Commudemy is a one-man consultancy. It's basically just me running the show, and my goal is whenever I work with a client, I customize an entire onboarding solution and training solution for that particular client. So let's say you're looking for a remote role, but you've never had a remote role before. I would start out by surveying the landscape for you, looking at your resume, looking at your cover letter, finding that competitive edge that would allow you to be successful in your job search, right? So that's kind of the first component is purely from a career coaching standpoint, how to unlock those opportunities for people that are looking. And then the other side of Commudemy, which is personally more fun for me, is those who are in a remote role right now, but they're looking to make their impact even more meaningful. So I do a lot of workshops and sessions and, one-on-one trainings on a lot of these skills. A lot of them are soft skills, which folks don't really maybe appreciate until they're in a remote role. So leading a meeting, how do you conduct a team call when there's so many different stakeholders and nobody's really in the same room and nobody's really being held accountable? There needs to be a manager kind of driving that process. Someone needs to take ownership. I deal with some of my clients who are interested in making their meetings more effective. So effective note-taking is something that I focus on a lot. Asynchronous communication, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Hangouts, all these different tools. How do you make the best, how do you utilize them the best way possible? And it's not a one size fits all, for a given team. So those are some of the things that I'm involved in from a community standpoint. Sorry, and it is a mouthful, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been a fun ride so far. I've really enjoyed giving back to the community.
Okay, so you're obviously an expert in like remote work, so I'm glad we have you on to kind of explain. You have seen this transition over the last couple of years because of the pandemic. So tell me about the remote space 2 years ago and how it has changed till now, and what you see it for the future, I guess, is one of my big questions.
Yeah, so I would say 2 years ago, the remote environment, the remote workspace was something that was seen as a nice to have in
Uh-huh.
the kind of day to day existence of a lot of employees around the world. It was something you did when you needed to, because maybe you have appointments or things to tend to that would interfere with your ability to work, right?
Right.
Since the pandemic, it's become the norm, right? It's become the default for a lot of organizations, even from a monetary standpoint, that are looking to cut costs and looking to optimize, their bottom line. They've let their employees have the freedom to operate from wherever. And as long as the work is getting done, it doesn't really matter where the employees are located. So I think that paradigm shift has been instrumental in enabling a lot of the discourse that we see, people talking about, and the future of work. Uh, I do believe that as we emerge from the pandemic, folks will begin to open up to the idea of a hybrid workplace where people are
Mm-hmm.
coming in kind of when they want to, and then staying at home, the rest of the time. But even with that being said, I think the vast majority of employees out there, folks that are working for, someone except for themselves, they will really embrace and continue to take advantage of the remote work revolution that we've seen.
So you give you alluded this before. You give recommendations to organizations of how to onboard remote people. Am I making that? Am I correct in that assumption? So
Yeah.
what are some recommendations that you do give to organizations?
So if an organization is looking to hire remote talent, they need to have a playbook in place in order to really achieve that. So, you know, orientation needs to be clearly thought out. You're having people onboarding from many different locations, many different backgrounds. How do you give everybody a consistent experience and an introduction to the company, the culture, their expectations, and their responsibilities in a uniform and scalable way? So that's something that I think is important. Uh, in addition to that, I think a lot of the work that I'm currently working on and thinking about is inculcating a culture of empathy, which is crucial when you have remote employees, right? Because let's say someone is running late or someone isn't available and it's an emergency. You need to be flexible in the remote workspace. You can't just go over to the person's cubicle or dock them a point for not having been there on time. Whatever the case may be,
Right.
which was the case before. So, not a day goes by where I think people that are working in the remote workplace have to be nimble and have to accommodate unforeseen circumstances. So that gets baked into the culture, that gets baked into the expectations. And then it goes, it's also a two-way street, right? Employees have to realize that they have those rights now that maybe weren't as clearly elucidated before. But all of this needs to be done in an atmosphere of understanding. We don't want people to abuse the privileges that come with remote work, and we don't want companies to take advantage of their employees either when it comes to giving them more work or feeling like, oh, this person's just behind their computer all day. Of course they can do two more projects, right? So
Right, and that is also something that I talk about. My partner, she feels in her remote work that like there is no clock, like there is
yeah,
no time to stop work because you're essentially always at work because you're always with your computer and that's where your work is.
yeah,
So I know that setting those boundaries are very important, especially for somebody who's looking into remote work. And that's something, let's say I come to you and I'm like, hey, I'm a project manager. I'm trying to get out of this organization and find somewhere where I can have remote work. What are some strategies about, going out and looking for that remote position that you would suggest?
Yeah, you have to be very deliberate in your search, right? Because especially now, there are a lot of companies that are hiring remote, and there are a lot of
Right.
companies that, because they're searching for talent, they're essentially willing to accommodate folks that might have any number of different circumstances. So it's crucial during the interview stage, despite, the interview game is a whole process on Commudemy that I go through, and other, career counselors and career coaches dedicate hours and hours to helping people become better at interviews. But I think one of the key components is ask the right questions during the interview process, right? Really, I mean, don't hesitate to, dig in and provide scenarios, provide specific examples of how accommodating the company might be to circumstances that are important to you. So let's say you're a caregiver, let's say you're a parent, right? Come to the interview with examples of situations that might merit that kind of flexibility that you're looking for, right? And really kind of gauge the person's response. Are they being genuine in terms of how they respond to those
That's a good,
requests, right?
right.
And it's a whole give and take, right? So you have to understand where you can make compromises, and then you need to also be very cognizant and aware of where the company is willing to make compromises. For example, I'll give you just kind of a brief example. A friend of mine started working at a place in September of last year, so it's almost been a year. And during the interview process, there was no set expectation around whether he would be remote or in the office,
Oh,
right?
shit.
So he
Okay.
went in thinking he would have to come into the office every single day, and he did, and it was a 45-minute commute one way, right? Lo and behold, 2 or 3 months in, he talks to his manager and says, "Hey, by the way, could I work remote 2 or 3 days a week because I don't need to be here? There's nobody else here." And the manager says, "Of course. Why didn't you ask me before?" You know. So just think about all those lost hours those first couple of months when he was driving to and from because he didn't
Yeah.
ask that question. Yeah.
I mean, did he not notice that his manager was not in the office with him? I mean, I feel like that's a little oversight on his part. Not to say he shouldn't have tried, but
Yeah.
like that.
He was playing it safe, and I think in the process he played it too safe, and he could have maybe surfaced that earlier. But you want to have those conversations as early as possible.
Right. And because I imagine a good question would be too is like, do I need to move to like wherever the headquarters is? Maybe I'm
Hmm.
living in Florida and I live in DC. Let's say like the headquarters is here. Am I going to be forced to move there eventually?
Yeah.
Right. I know that would
Or do
probably be a good
significant
question.
travel. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or travel significantly, like maybe you have to be there a couple days a month or a week a month, things like that, right? So yeah, very, very important questions to ask.
Well, so it's so this concept of empathy is is an interesting one. Do you feel like more people have empathy now? I personally think that people have more empathy with the remote work because people are parents and their teams and they have dogs and cats and there's noise outside and I don't know how many times during a meeting somebody says like, "Oh, I'm sorry, there's like
My dog
something
is
happening.
barking or
My
whatever.
dog's barking or my
Yeah.
baby's crying or like there's something happening outside."
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. Like, do you feel that as well?
I think like if I were to generalize, I would say empathy has gone up and people are willing to look past those things that perhaps before remote work became a thing and became the norm, maybe folks weren't as willing to accommodate those types of situations. But at the same time, I'm also very cognizant, or I try to be very thoughtful about whether that empathy is genuine or if it's forced, right?
Mm,
Um, because it's easy to just it's easy to be empathetic in a disingenuous way. Like
right.
you might think that that's the thing to do because everybody else is doing it, right? But it
I've
takes a
never
lot of
thought
work.
about that.
It takes a lot of
Yeah.
work and effort to be very meaningful and very genuine in that interaction. So I mean, I have, team members now that are all over. I have a direct report who's international, right? And things come up and you have to really show by actions and not just by words, to be able to convey that feeling of genuine um, empathy.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great point because I think I think you bring up a really great point that during the interview process, like you have to actually do some sleuthing of like, is this a real? But that's a lot of like, you're judging these people to see if you actually want to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what question could you ask to understand if somebody is actually genuinely empathetic. I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, I think it goes back to situations that you can bring up that have affected you in past experiences, right? If you had an emergency that you had to tend to, or you had a circumstance that was, you know, pretty important to you, and maybe your previous employer or whatever type of situation you were in didn't end up working out the way that you wanted to, right? That's one possible strategy. So you don't have to necessarily engage in a whole mental exercise to try to think, what if blah blah blah. It's important to just introspect and come up with ways that you think are important.
Right.
And then I think another part of it too is see what the company is doing to build community within the remote space, right? So a lot of companies are using Slack, and they have random Slack channels that are like ways for people to build relationships with colleagues and break silos and all of that.
Right.
As we transition out of working 100% remote, are they trying to do get-togethers locally in your city? Are they hosting events? Are they trying to build a sense of, okay, yes, we do have an existence that's an emoji on Slack, or that's an avatar on Slack, but are we doing other things to really kind of build that community? And that bridges both the virtual space as well as the in-person space. Yeah.
So I want to go back to kind of another scenario. Like I work remotely full on, and my company has announced like that's just going to be forever as well. So let's say in a year I'm looking to transition to another organization, but I want to keep the remoteness. I know it's probably easier since I actually have an understanding of like what remote work looks like. But what are some traps that people may fall into and that they may not know moving forward to help them keep in that remote space?
So some organizations are a little bit loosey-goosey on what they mean by remote. Like
Okay.
they may not necessarily see, they may try to market remote as being, it's a little bit complicated. I've seen job postings where they say remote until, for example, safe to return to the office, or they try to make they put a condition there which is very arbitrary, and they kind of maybe bait you with the idea that it's remote currently, but they know at some point it's no longer going to be remote. So
Right.
I think that's a good question to ask. Is this remote moving forward and never going to be changed, or is there a possibility that this will one day become an in-person role? And then I think not maybe red flags, but other things to consider are, during the interview process, the current team that you'd be working with, are they all over the place, right? That's a good indicator. If they have team members that are distributed, chances are that they have given a lot of these concepts some thought, and they have processes in place, even if they're preliminary or kind of at a maybe not as thought out. They do have some processes in place with regards to making remote work, scalable and feasible moving into the future. But yeah, those would be two strategies that I could think of.
So, so tell me a little bit about yourself, about your professional goals moving forward now with Commudemy and just you. Like, where do you see this community moving forward, and how do you see it affecting like yourself and the overall arching work moving forward?
Yeah, so my background is in e-learning and education technology, and I really love building content and courses that help induce behavior change, right? So with Commudemy, I've been able to do that on a very kind of one-on-one basis. I work with clients or I work with folks. I want to really scale that out to where Commudemy becomes kind of a place where my lessons can live for eternity, where I can house content and build things that people can leverage and download and use, even when I'm not there physically working with them, or virtually, I should say, working with them one-on-one. I want to get to that point where it becomes a repository that can stand on its own, right? So that's where some of my ideas are right now, thinking about different learning management platforms and integrating those services. And I also see it eventually becoming ideally a place for other remote work enthusiasts, if I could call it that, if that, building them into the community, building advisors, and bringing other individuals that are active in the space to kind of contribute to the community that we're building. That's another direction I hope to take this whole initiative into.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. I really think people need help with this remote work concept, because I do think that there is, to your point, we all went remote, right? Because of necessity, because of like the pandemic, and all of this was an outside force that was occurring. And now I see a lot of employers starting to be like, well, like, come on, guys, like, come back in. Like, the crisis is over. But everybody's like, but I like this. Like,
Yeah.
Stop. Why? Like, what is the point of all of this? I thought my organization did really something really well. They asked the employees that we literally had groups over a couple of months where they were like, what do you guys want? How do you want this to look? And I thought I really commended them on their effort to try to get that in place. Mm-hmm. But I see so many organizations trying to be like, hey guys, like, you should come back once a week, maybe twice a week. And I do think that some people are starting to do like that hybrid mentality too. And I wonder for myself, to your point of, do you worry that with this remote work, do you worry that we are becoming too separated and that will hurt people's careers in the long run? And like you said, doing these events where like you get together is really important. And how can you do that on a smaller basis as an employee?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is actually involves taking initiative. You have to be deliberately carving out space and time on your calendar to interact with people that are not your common work buddies, let's say, the people right. that you interact with on a very regular basis. So, many organizations do like a virtual happy hour, let's say, where 3 to 5 p.m. on Friday, they have a channel open and anybody can come in, drink a virtual beer, and talk about whatever it is that's on their mind. We've played games kind of in a virtual way where everybody gets together and we play, code names. Let's say code names is popular because browser based and you just go and have fun, and you can have teams and then people kind of competing against one another. Those are two easy ways, but I would say something that I tell a lot of folks that I work with is, try to meet somebody new every week. It doesn't matter. Put a half an hour on their calendar and just call it a coffee break, right? Calendars are sometimes like Tetris when you're looking at your colleagues' calendars, right? But it could be 15 minutes and it could just be, hey, I've seen, your role or your department is working on something cool, or I want to learn more about what you're doing. I've heard about you, whatever context you think would be reasonable, and just have an off the cuff conversation. It's amazing how willing people are to have those types of conversations if you're willing to ask, right? I think a lot of people are genuinely craving connection, and a lot of us are maybe mentally not in the right. We think we might be bothering the other person if we reach out and make that bold leap, but almost every time I've done this, it's been received very well, right? And I've gone on to meet some of these folks in person, and we had something that we actually could base our interactions off of because we had put in the time to kind of get to know each other before.
Yeah, absolutely. I work, like, my job allows me to work across the company and interact with a lot of different people, which I'm very grateful for. But I'm amazed at when I talk to people, how siloed they are. And I would be, oh, have you talked to this person who may not work on like a different sector? They work in the same sector, just like on another team.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, I've never interacted with that person. I'm like, this person is just like one removed from you. You're not even that far away. And I do worry about that, because I did try to go into the office, but nobody goes into the office, and it's like, this is pointless.
Yeah.
So I've struggled with this concept a lot. Like, I want to be remote, but I also want to interact with people. And then you try the happy hours. The happy hours kind of suck. Like I know they don't. I know you try, but like sometimes it's like, man,
They
we're
feel
not
forced.
actually. Yeah, they feel forced, and you're not. And you can also only one person can talk on this platform at the same time.
Mm.
So like, it's hard to have like a you go into when you do having these things in real person, like you talk to the person next to you,
Yeah.
and they are able to talk to the person next to them, and you have a lot more interactions going on simultaneously.
Yeah. It's a lot more organic, right? And whereas here, it feels like you're still just the Brady Bunch screens, just maybe rearranged
exactly
somehow, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So what's something that we haven't talked about that you think that maybe something we should have brought up?
I don't know. I feel like we checked off all the boxes.
That's okay too.
Yeah,
that means I did my job as an interviewer, so that's good.
Yeah.
So I guess to wrap it up, like how can people find you? And the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is commudemy.com. So COMMUDEMY.com. And my email is farhan@commudemy.com. My first name is spelled Farhan. I'm sure that's going to be in the show notes anyway.
We're going to put it in the show notes. I'm going to put all the information in the show notes. Don't worry.
Perfect. That's perfect. And then the website is the entry point for following me on Medium, on Twitter, and everywhere else that I have a online presence. So looking to spread the word and help more folks that are on the cusp of making the leap to the remote work revolution, if they haven't already.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Farhan. This has been fantastic. It's a very important topic, and I'm so glad we discussed it.
Thank you so much for having me.